Gen AI and artificial intelligence is going to get better and better over our lifetimes. But I don't think we're going to get to a point of where Gen AI is generating production-ready code for complicated applications for 20 or 25 years.
Hey everybody, for this episode, we brought John Thompson back. We're talking specifically about his book, The Path to AGI. AGI is something that if you haven't heard about it already, is going to be talked about more and more. I don't want to spoiler alert here, but it's not going to happen when folks are predicting it's going to happen. And so anyway, we talked to John about his book. If you are unfamiliar, I think John was one of the first folks we had on this year in January. So check out his full episode there where we just talk AI in general and agents. Kind of a good primer there. And then John was the first episode we had during this weekly AI series. So check that one out also. So John was on the full Audit Podcast in January. We talked about AI agents. If you don't know, real quick, John is not necessarily an audit guy, but he is all AI. He's been doing AI since AI was a thing practically. And by that, I mean for 40 years. There's been a lot of discussion around AGI. I know in a lot of the newsletters that I see, there's hey, we're close to AGI, or this feels like AGI is something I saw on a message board the other day. This feels like AGI. It's not. All right. With that said, here we go. All right, John. So I mentioned the book in the intro and kind of gave a little bit about what it's all about, but I wanted you from the perspective of there's chief audit executives that listen to the show, other auditors as well. Why get the book? Why should they get the book? Any kind of high level description you want to provide, big takeaways from the book. If you summarize it into 5 bullet points or 3 bullet points that are the most critical, what would they be? I realized I asked about 5 questions there. I'm going to let you take whatever you want to and just kind of run with it, but just speak about the book.
Well, that's a great question, Trent. And, the reason I wrote the book is that there's many people out there talking about artificial general intelligence. And many people, business professionals, lay people on the street, non-technical people are getting the sense that AI is just this one monolithic thing. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to make it clear to everybody, the book is written, for, just college educated professionals, non-technical professionals. And I wanted people to understand that there's traditional AI, there's generative AI, and there's causal AI. And all of these things are working in the background at this point. And, traditional AI is doing all sorts of forecasting and predicting. Generative AI is writing novels and code and generating movies and things like that. And causal AI is actually really going to help us get to the point of understanding, what are causing things to happen. So I wrote the book for people to get a clear understanding of what AI is in a more nuanced way. So if anybody really wants to understand what's going on in the field of AI, I think the book's a good way to get there.
I think causal is the one where people are going, I haven't heard in the news about that one. Speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Causal AI, is from a technical field, 3 years ago, it was the next big thing. From AI circles, everybody's like, hey, causal is really hot. It's really going to happen. And then all of a sudden, Gen AI just took off like a rocket and supplanted causal from an interest perspective. So really, when people talk about artificial general intelligence or AI acting like it's has human intelligence or human level intelligence, they don't understand that, what Gen AI is doing is just predicting the next word, the next sentence, the next paragraph. That's not enough to get us to human level intelligence. There's a long way to get there. So causal AI is a new branch of calculus that allows us to understand mathematically X causes Y. And it breaks it down in a way that we can mathematically model it and we can understand it. So a friend of mine is writing a new book and he's focused on sports. So you could look at it and say, okay, the player is fatigued and their compensation is they're changing their biomechanical, movements. All right, we can see that in video and we can watch that happen and we can model it with causal AI and say, okay, they're either going to get hurt or they're going to, perform in a suboptimal way or both. Mm-hmm. So you can actually model these things and mathematically say, you should sub them out now. So go ahead.
Who like that sounds amazing. The book in and of itself, and just that example. So, can you share any more details about that book, the title of it, who the author,
Yeah,
follow them?
it's being written right
Yeah.
now. The guy's name's Bill Schmarzo.
Yep.
He's gonna have it out, I think, in like 3 or 4 months from
Okay.
now. So I don't know what the title of it is, but it's AI and in athletics and sports and things like that.
Okay. And one reason I ask is this is what I tell people all the time, and I just told this story yesterday. Um, for those that weren't interested in analytics, I would say find your hobby and then apply analytics to your hobby. So mine was fantasy football, tons of data around that, and so I just played with
Mhm.
that and this tool that I didn't really want to use or learn, but I needed to for the job. And I went, okay, now I got it. This one is better. So similarly, if it's like I'm still just not into the AI thing right now, but if you're a sports fan, I think maybe keep an eye out for that because I think that is fascinating.
Yeah, sports analytics is taking off. We talked earlier about Michigan and I teach at Michigan, and Michigan has a whole sports analytics program
Hmm.
that, is all about understanding, player fatigue and swapping people in and out. And, the way that Bill writes about it in his book, I think I've read 3 chapters on it so far. It's really intriguing. You're watching a game going on and all the data's coming in and the models are running and it's making recommendations to the coach. Hey, change the offense. And it goes across baseball, football, hockey, everything. So it's quite intriguing when you apply it to sports.
So also in the book, a few things that I pulled out. So one that I thought was interesting was that you say that you still recommend kids major in computer science when they go to college. Um, and the reason I thought that was interesting is just because the ease of which anyone, for the most part, can write code with AI is, I mean, incredibly easy. Um, so I wanted to hear a little bit more about why you think kids should do that. And one reason I asked that, and I really like the audience is internal auditors, but one of my favorite things about this is, and like, so if anybody's familiar with Tim Ferriss podcast, he basically picks whatever topic he's interested in. He finds somebody that's an expert, and it could be, I mean, across the spectrum of knowledge, and then he goes and grabs them. And so he almost says like it's just kind of like his playground. So with that said, anyone who's ever talked to me knows that if you ask me about my kid, I will talk for like 15 minutes about him. And so when I saw that, I went, okay, this is not really for the audience. This one's more for me, selfishly, and my kid. But so that's why I kind of wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I encouraged my son and daughter both to go to engineering school. Zach went to Illinois, computer science, and Kate went to Michigan, School of Information. And I hear this all the time. People like, oh, Gen AI is writing code and there's no future for developers. Well, over the last couple of years, we generated about 4 million lines of code with Gen AI, and about 20% of it was usable. So, it does generate code, but it generates code in a very specific area, really simplistic things. Most of us, auditors understand this terminology, programmers understand this terminology. You have to do your housekeeping. You have to go through and set the registers and set up all the variables and do everything in programming. That's what Gen AI is good for.
Mhm.
When you get into sophisticated logic and trying to do something that's really hard to do, Gen AI doesn't do a very good job there. So yeah, so it's scraping off the bottom 20% of coding tasks. And if you talk to any developer, they would say, that's the 20% I don't want to do.
Yeah.
So it'll get better. There's no doubt about it. Gen AI and artificial intelligence is going to get better and better over our lifetimes. But I don't think we're going to get to a point of where Gen AI is generating production ready code for complicated applications for 20 or 25 years.
And I think if you follow enough developers online, Reddit, LinkedIn, wherever, you'll see where they echo the same thing. They're like, yeah, it's great for this, but it still can't. And I can't imagine it doing all of this. But to that, I was also curious, how's the curriculum? Because I know you're at Michigan. How's the curriculum changed relative to CS and analytics because of the use of Gen AI now?
Yeah, the conversation is ongoing, and the curriculum development and evolution is happening right now. So I was in a part of a conversation 2 weeks ago about, is vibe coding a bad thing? Should we be teaching vibe coding? And my perspective on it is if you teach vibe coding the way people talk about it, that's a very bad thing. But if you talk about vibe coding as a component or a phase of development that fits into the broader scheme of how code is developed, that's a very good thing. I'm pro AI, I'm pro development, I'm pro, evolution of technologies, but we need them to evolve. They don't show up fully formed. In this respect, AI is like children. They don't come out, speaking full sentences and writing Shakespeare and things like that. It takes a few years for them to get there. And AI is the same way. So we're in the early days of generative AI and causal AI. We'll get there.
Yeah.
But if you're going to college right now, or if you're in college or even a generation or two back and you want to study computer science, do it. You'll have a great career.
Also pulled from the book was your perspective and thoughts on emergent behaviors. And I gotta think most of the audience is not familiar with that term. But if I
Mhm.
summarize what you said about it in the book was it's ridiculous. So with that, if you could define it for the audience and then kind of give your thoughts on it.
Yeah. We, we're 3 years into Gen AI at this point, and it's really an interesting thing. We've had neural nets for 50 years or something like that, and we've done all sorts of modeling. We've built all sorts of models and everything, and the real interesting thing about Gen AI is that OpenAI, Amazon, and Google all basically jammed the internet through a neural network, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet, good and bad. So there for a while people were finding out things in these models and saying, oh, it's coming up with its own thoughts, these emergent behaviors are happening. And I said, that's crazy. It's been trained on the breadth and the depth of the internet, so there are some corners of the internet you're not going to think of, but it's in there. So if you stimulate the model in a certain way, boom, these things pop out. This is not Gen AI coming up with great new original thoughts. This is people finding the corners of the models and stimulating it and getting the information to come back out. So, you've looked at the book, Trent. I don't really have a starry-eyed view of this. I'm a very practical, pragmatic person. We will have great functionality coming out of AI, but we're not going to have original thinking AI for a long time.
All right. So earlier you talked about like if we summarized AGI high level as having a human level intelligence. And I feel like there's people who hear that and go, like, dude, have you seen ChatGPT? It's brilliant. What do you mean we're not there right now? Um, in addition to that, and you give multiple aspects of the definition of AGI. I think it went on, at least on my Kindle, for about 2 to 4 pages. The one that stuck out to me the most, and I was telling you this before we hit the record button. I was reading it at night in my bed, and I just stared at the ceiling for 10 minutes going, how I can't even imagine how this is possible. But your definition of AGI, or at least a piece of it, is AGI would have to independently think and thereby generate original thoughts, not just predictions. And as you said earlier, that's what Gen AI is doing right now. It's just predicting based off the internet that was, shoved through there. So I don't even know if I have a question there, but thoughts. I guess I can't imagine AGI even a possibility, even after reading the book, with the idea that it has to generate original thoughts.
Yeah, this gets to the metaphysical discussion that we have sometimes. Went to a discussion on campus in Ann Arbor where one professor was getting up, and I thought, oh, this will be an interesting conversation. I'll show up, and there'll be 10 of us. The auditorium was full. I think there was probably 300 to 500 people in the auditorium, and his topic was: Is AI sentient? Does AI have a consciousness? And he was very eloquent. He's a professor of philosophy. He went around and around and around. And every time he brought an argument to close, the answer was no, it does not have sentience. It is not conscious. It does not think. Now, this is what some people are out there saying we have today,
Hmm.
but we do not. What we have is some really elegant software that can predict the next verb, the next noun, the next frame in a video, the next piece of code, those kind of things. So that's why I say in the book, the path to artificial general intelligence, we won't get there for another 123 years. because we're a long way away from that.
Yeah, even the debate over reasoning, I just went, when reasoning first came out, I went, what does it even mean to reason? And I just again stared at the ceiling. I was like, what does it mean to reason? How could this can it reason? Can it reason? It can't really reason, can it? And I think
No.
you had said even, well before, like, no, it can't. And then there was uh who Apple or someone put out a paper that was like officially no, it
Yep.
can't. Is that right? Yeah.
That's right. I've been saying this for almost a year that, there's a label out there. We have large language models. We all know that. And there's large reasoning models, large action models, and all these different kind of things. And people were starting to use the label reasoning. These models are reasoning. These models are doing this. These models are doing that. And I've always said that's not true. Now, there's lots of things that people give marketing labels to, and they can call whatever they want. That's fine, but it bothers me that people are using the large reasoning model or reasoning tag and misleading people. These models are very good at inference. They infer very well, and they infer at billions of times a second, but they do not reason. Inferring A to B is different than coming up with, hey, I'm reasoning that, Trent is trying to, go on Amazon and look for this and look for that. He's really trying to find this. And I'll tell him, I'll help him out and get him there. Those are two radically different things.
All right. So I have the book pulled up, and the very
Okay.
last sentence says, ask me about this when we meet at a future event or conference. This is an event. We're at an event, right? This podcast is an
Right.
event. So I think it
Sure.
qualifies. I
Yeah.
was like, does it qualify? Yeah, it's an event. All right.
It qualifies.
Um,
Absolutely.
you say, can intelligence be derived by merely thinking without using data? Can we divorce thinking from data in the human mind? Can we as humans generate completely new intelligence on our own without data? And that was another where you just sit there and you could take any one of those questions and throw it to 1,000 philosophers and probably get 1,000 different answers. But we are here at an event, and so I did want to ask you about that.
Yeah, it's a really cool concept. The idea of, I do think people come up with new ideas and synthesized thoughts, and that's, in my opinion, that's part of intelligence. Is that, people are walking down the street and, you see a bird fly by and then you see a bus go by and all of a sudden, bam, those two things come together and you come up with a brand new original thought. Now, people would argue, well, there was data there, there was visual stimulation there. But that's different than what I'm talking about here, because models, as we think of them, predictive models, large language models, Gen AI models, causal models, they are nothing without data, so models like that cannot do what humans do. So the question is, do you think they will be in the future? Do you think models will have enough inherent circuitry and understanding to be able to synthesize originally new thoughts without any additional data? Maybe, but it's going to be at least 120 years before we get there. So I'm an optimist. I think AI will be able to do many of these things that we're talking about, but it's going to take a long time to get there. And then I often have people say to me, "Oh, well, you're a pessimist. You're trying to, discourage people from coming into the field." Actually, I'm not. I'm trying to encourage people to come to the field because I've been working on this for 40 years and I'm nowhere near done. So if you want to have a career that you don't have to worry about it ending, this is a good one, because you could work from the time you left college until you're an old man like I am now and, have a fulfilling 45 or 50-year run that you never ran out of problems to try to figure out. I think that's the definition of a joyous career. So I think there's a lot to do and it's a lot of fun.
A lot of folks listening, they're like, did not realize we were going to get philosophical on here. This is the most philosophical we've ever gotten, but
I didn't know that either.
I mean, even on, I mentioned the Tim Ferriss podcast, and I should probably give more credit than just saying this, but it was some philosopher, and his thing was on consciousness. And does a tree have consciousness? Does a rock have consciousness? And you hear that and you think, well, no, that's insane. But then you hear his perspective and you go, oh, maybe it does. And so, um, to think about just the philosophical side of AI is I think, to me, very fascinating. It's well above my head, but it is fun to stare at a wall sometimes and think about it. So anyway, with that said, I appreciate you coming back on. Hopefully folks have a more grounded sense of reality when it comes to AI and AGI and where it is right now and where it's going to be in the next 123 years, I think. Okay.
That's the
Got
number.
it. All right. So with that said, what else do you want to leave the audience with? Take the mic and lead us out.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Trent and I were talking earlier about a label he put on something I'd never heard of, the AI anxiety. There's a lot of that out there, everybody. I wrote the book to try to damp some of that down. So, if you're interested in any of the 5 books I've written, go on to Amazon, search for John K. Thompson. You'll either get my books or a guy that teaches children how to play piano. I think it's pretty clear which one I am. But if you're in the data and analytics and AI space, find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. I have one of the most densest, most high density networks that's focused on AI and analytics, and I'd love to be connected with you. So, Trent, thanks for having me on again.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.